What if the very thing keeping you from peace is the noise you've learned to live with? Most people are drowning in distraction without even realizing it, scrolling through endless screens, chasing likes, validation, comfort, sensation. Constant stimulation has become normal. But what if normal is the problem? When you're always feeding the body, its urges, its cravings, its need to feel good right now, you stop hearing the deeper part of you. You silence the very voice that could change your life. We live in a world that tells us to keep going, push harder, do more, stay busy, fill the silence with something, anything, so we don't have to sit alone with our thoughts. But in that constant rush, we lose ourselves. We forget who we are without the noise. We stop listening. And when we stop listening, we stop growing. Because growth doesn't come from outside stimulation. It comes from stillness. It comes when the body finally goes silent and the soul begins to speak. That voice inside you, it's still there, waiting. It's soft but powerful. And it only speaks when the world fades, when the cravings calm, when the body finally gets quiet. This is where your real strength lives. Not in doing more, but in feeling more. Not in reaching out, but in turning inward. Most people spend their whole lives chasing things that keep them numb. But you're here for more. You're here because something in you knows there's a deeper life available. Something richer, more real, more meaningful. That deeper life begins with abstinence. Not as a punishment, not as some rigid rule, but as a path back to power. A conscious pause. A quiet choice to disconnect from what drains you and reconnect to what defines you. When you begin to say no to the distractions that seduce your body, you begin to say yes to the parts of you that never needed noise to be whole. You create space. And in that space, everything changes. It's not easy. Silence can be uncomfortable. Stillness can feel like withdrawal. You'll feel the itch to run, to grab something, to fill the void. But what feels like emptiness is actually healing. It's the discomfort of shedding everything that doesn't belong. It's the start of clarity, of freedom, of real connection with yourself, with your purpose, with your peace. So stay with this moment, stay with this silence. There's something sacred here, something your body can't feel but your soul remembers. The reward for staying isn't just emotional, it's transformational. You stop reacting and start choosing. You stop chasing and start aligning. You begin to live with intention, not addiction. And that's the truth behind abstinence. It's not about what you're giving up, it's about what you finally make room for. So if you've ever felt like something's missing, maybe it's not more stimulation you need. Maybe it's less. Maybe the breakthrough you've been searching for begins when everything else goes quiet. Because when the body goes silent, the soul speaks. Abstinence is often misunderstood. People hear the word and immediately think of restriction, denial, even shame. But what they don't realize is that abstinence isn't about deprivation, it's about direction. It's not about what you're refusing, it's about what you're making possible. When you remove the constant pull of cravings, you begin to stand still long enough to ask yourself deeper questions. What am I really hungry for? What am I running from? What have I been filling my life with that only leaves me emptier in the end? The body always wants more. More comfort, more pleasure, more escape. But the soul wants truth. It wants purpose. And these two are often in conflict. The body speaks loudest in moments of weakness, but the soul speaks clearest in moments of discipline. Every time you choose not to act on impulse, you're strengthening the voice within that's been buried under noise for far too long. You're telling yourself, I am not ruled by desire. I choose who I become. This choice over time rewires your entire sense of identity, because abstinence is more than a behavior, it's a mindset, a declaration. It says, I'm no longer giving my power away to things that never fill me. I'm not chasing temporary highs while sacrificing lasting peace. I'm ready to listen to myself, to hear the truth that doesn't need validation to be real. That kind of strength can't be bought, can't be borrowed. It can only be built, slowly, intentionally, through moments of quiet defiance against the world's constant noise. And the change that follows is subtle at first. You'll begin to notice the space between reaction and response. You'll feel urges rise up, but you won't be a slave to them anymore. You'll start catching yourself before the old habits take over. You'll begin choosing with clarity instead of craving. That space, that pause, that's where real power lives. That's where freedom is born. Abstinence doesn't shrink you. It expands you. It creates room inside you for something deeper, something real. When you stop numbing, you start noticing. You become more aware of your emotions, your thoughts, your triggers. And in that awareness, you gain control. You stop being tossed around by every desire. And you start building a foundation of calm strength that no outside force can shake. The truth is, everything you're searching for, Peace, purpose, confidence doesn't come from adding more. It comes from subtracting what no longer serves you, from stepping back, from letting go. Abstinence teaches you how to stop feeding the noise and start fueling the soul, not through pressure, but through presence. Not through fear, but through freedom. You don't need to be perfect. You don't need to have all the answers. You just need to begin. To trust that within the silence, something sacred is unfolding. Something that was never meant to be loud. Your soul doesn't scream, it whispers, and once you hear it, you'll never want to go back. There's a quiet power that awakens when you stop chasing stimulation and start observing your own mind. Most people live in a loop, craving, feeding, crashing, repeating. They don't even know they're trapped. The body wants comfort and the mind follows blindly. But abstinence interrupts that loop. It breaks the automatic cycle. It creates space between impulse and action. And in that space, something incredible happens. You begin to remember who you are without the noise. This remembering is not easy. At first it feels like loss, like something is missing. But what's actually missing is the fog. The haze that kept you numb, the distraction that kept you running, and once it lifts, you see clearly. You see your thoughts, your emotions, your wounds, all of it. Nothing hidden, nothing disguised. This is where true growth begins, not in pretending to be okay, but in meeting yourself honestly, fully, without filters. Abstinence is the gateway to that honesty. Because when the body no longer gets its usual fix, the mind is forced to face itself. The emptiness you once feared becomes the mirror you've needed. You begin to recognize how often you reach for comfort, not because you need it, but because you're avoiding something deeper. Loneliness, insecurity, grief, anger, regret. These emotions aren't weaknesses. They're messages, signals from the soul that something inside is asking to be seen, healed, and transformed. And when you stop running from them, when you let abstinence guide you inward, you learn how strong you truly are. You realize you don't need to be comforted. You need to be conscious. You don't need to escape, you need to engage. Every urge that passes without control over you becomes a small victory. And those victories build something no one can take from you. Self-mastery. The kind of mastery that doesn't shout, it doesn't beg for attention. It radiates silently, unshakably from within. The more you practice abstinence, the more sensitive you become. Not weak, but aware. Aware of your triggers. Aware of your truth. Aware of what deserves your energy and what drains it. You begin to reclaim time, attention, peace. You begin to choose discomfort over distraction. Because you've tasted something better than temporary relief. You've tasted alignment. That's why this path matters. Not because it makes life easier, but because it makes you deeper, more intentional, more whole. Abstinence is not about denying the body. It's about elevating the self. It's about choosing not to settle for surface-level satisfaction when something sacred is waiting underneath. This is the transformation the world never talks about. The kind that doesn't need applause. The kind that doesn't need to be seen. Because once the soul starts speaking, it doesn't need to convince anyone. It simply lives in truth. It leads. It grounds. It heals. And that, more than any fleeting pleasure, is where real power lives. In the silence, in the stillness, in the decision to rise. Growth does not come from feeding every desire. It comes from learning to sit in the hunger without flinching. That hunger, that craving, that ache, it's not weakness. It's the fire where character is forged. When you stop responding to every urge, you discover something deeper than control. You discover who you are when nothing is feeding you. And in that discovery, you find power that cannot be given, only earned. Most people run from that hunger. They see it as a problem. They try to numb it, bury it, escape it. But hunger is not the enemy. It is the doorway. It is the space where all truth lives. Because when the body wants, and you do not give in, you start to hear what that want was really about. Not food, not sex, not comfort, but connection, meaning, freedom. Your soul doesn't crave indulgence, it craves alignment. Abstinence is the daily practice of letting that hunger speak, not reacting, not distracting, just listening, letting the wave of discomfort rise without breaking you. It teaches you that urges are not facts, feelings are not commands, and discipline is not punishment, it's presence. When you can stay rooted in the storm, you stop being a prisoner of sensation, you become a leader of your own inner world. Every moment you choose stillness over stimulation, you're rewiring the mind. You're teaching your nervous system that peace is possible, that you don't need chaos to feel alive. You're proving to yourself that emptiness isn't your enemy. It's your invitation to see clearly, to feel honestly, to move with intention. The body may protest, but the soul will rise. And what rises is not hollow strength. It is sacred resilience. This kind of resilience doesn't need recognition. It doesn't crave applause. It simply exists, quiet, grounded, unshakable. Because you've met yourself in the silence. You've faced the hunger and didn't run. And now you trust yourself in a way others can't understand. Because you've proven you can hold your own pain without drowning in it. You can feel without falling. Want without losing yourself. Abstinence is not about less. It's about more. More clarity, more direction, more freedom from the things that once owned you. It gives you back your power, one choice at a time. Not because the urges go away, but because you rise above them. You learn to witness, not obey. You learn to feel, not follow. That shift changes everything. There's a strength that only silence can build, a wisdom that only withholding can reveal, and a power that only patience can awaken. When you stop reaching outward and start sitting inward, you become something new. Not harder, not colder, but deeper, more conscious, more whole. That's the real reward. Not what you resist, but what you reveal. Not what you lose, but what you finally remember. This is the gift of abstinence. Not the absence of desire, but the birth of discipline. Not the denial of the body, but the awakening of the soul. The moment you stop feeding every impulse, you meet a version of yourself that's been hidden beneath layers of distraction. This version isn't frantic. It doesn't beg for attention. It doesn't chase fleeting highs. It simply waits, quiet, unmoved, watching who you become when there's nothing left to grasp onto but the present moment. That's where your transformation begins, not in controlling the world outside, but in mastering the world within. Every craving you deny is a signal. It reveals the distance between who you are and who you're becoming. The body screams because it fears silence, but silence is where all truth lives. When the noise dies, your thoughts grow louder, and at first that can feel overwhelming. You'll hear the voices you tried to mute, doubt, fear, shame, regret. But beneath them, there's another voice, softer, wiser, stronger. It doesn't shout, it doesn't beg, it knows. It waits for you to be still enough to listen. Abstinence strips away what you thought you needed and shows you what you truly need. Not validation, not pleasure, not escape. You need presence, you need depth. You need to look in the mirror and recognize yourself again. The person who doesn't rely on substitutes for peace. The one who can feel the ache of longing and still stay grounded. That strength doesn't come from resisting the world. It comes from returning to yourself. You weren't made to be a slave to urges. You weren't meant to be pulled by every wave of sensation. You were created to lead, to stand, to hold. But somewhere along the way, you were taught that feelings must be fixed immediately. That discomfort should be avoided at all costs. That pleasure equals peace. And none of that is true. Real peace doesn't come from indulgence. It comes from integrity, from choosing what aligns with your highest self, not what numbs your current pain. There is dignity in restraint. There is beauty in holding back, not because you fear what's ahead, but because you honor what's within. It's found in self-awareness, in conscious decisions, in deliberate stillness. You don't need more to feel whole. You need less of what divides you from your inner truth. Every time you say no to what doesn't serve you, you're saying yes to who you're meant to be. You're creating space for clarity, space for healing, space for real joy, the kind that isn't dependent on circumstances, but rooted in presence. This is the soul's language. It's not spoken through noise, but through stillness. Not through excess, but through intention. When the body quiets, the soul steps forward. And when it speaks, it doesn't ask for control. It asks for connection. That's what abstinence is, a return to connection, a homecoming to the self you were always meant to be. There is something sacred about restraint, not because it makes you appear strong, but because it reminds you that you already are. Every time you resist the temptation to run, to hide, to distract yourself with quick relief, you send a clear message to your own mind. I am in control. Not the craving, not the fear, not the habit, me. And that message becomes louder every time you choose to hold the line. That is how self-respect is born, not through external validation, but through internal decision. Abstinence doesn't just shift behavior, it shifts identity. You begin to see yourself differently. You begin to feel a sense of quiet pride, not because you've denied yourself something, but because you've proven you no longer need it to feel whole. That is a deep, rare kind of power. The ability to stay rooted while the storm rages around you. The ability to feel discomfort without begging it to end. That's what makes you unstoppable. That's what makes you free. This world is filled with noise, with pressure to indulge, to satisfy, to give in to everything that screams for attention. But the moment you choose a different path, you stop reacting to life and start responding to it. You stop being pulled by every outside force and start building strength from within. Abstinence creates space, and in that space, the soul begins to speak more clearly. It doesn't speak in demands, it speaks in clarity, in direction, in truth, and that truth becomes your anchor. You begin to realize that the things you once chased were never the answer. They were only covering the deeper questions. Who am I without this habit? Who am I when I stop numbing myself? Who am I when I stop running? These questions can feel frightening, but they are necessary because they lead you to something most people never find: wholeness. And wholeness isn't about perfection. It's about integrity, about living in alignment with what you know is right, even when it's hard, even when it hurts. When you practice abstinence, you're not rejecting the world. You're refining your relationship with it. You're choosing to engage with life on your terms, not through addiction, not through impulse, but through presence. And in doing so, you discover that peace was never out there. It was always inside, waiting for everything else to quiet down so it could finally be heard. The longer you walk this path, the more grounded you become. Not because life gets easier, but because you get clearer. You stop seeking rescue. You start building resilience. You stop needing to escape. You start standing in your truth. That is the gift of abstinence. It brings you back to yourself. Not the self shaped by habit or fear, but the self born in stillness. The one who remembers. The one who knows. The one who leads from within, even when no one is watching. Especially then. You cannot heal in the same noise that broke you. You cannot rise while staying chained to what weakens you. Abstinence is not punishment. It is clarity. It is the bold decision to step out of the haze and walk straight into your power. The moment you stop feeding every craving, you begin to hear yourself. And what you hear is not chaos. It's strength you forgot you had. It's wisdom buried beneath repetition. It's a voice that says, you were never meant to live numb. You were meant to live awake. The more you hold yourself back from what numbs you, the more you begin to feel what's real. And yes, that includes pain. But pain is not your enemy. Pain is feedback. It tells you where the wound is. It tells you what needs attention, not avoidance. When you stop silencing that pain with constant comfort, you finally give it space to be felt, processed, and released. That's what abstinence gives you. Space. Space to breathe. Space to reflect. Space to choose something greater than habit. And in that space, you begin to notice something powerful. The urges lose their power. What once felt impossible to resist becomes background noise. What once dictated your behavior now fades into insignificance. Not because the world changes, but because you do. You stop being reactive, you become intentional. You stop looking for something to soothe the ache, and instead you start strengthening the place where the ache began. That shift, small at first, becomes life-changing. Every time you pause, every time you breathe through the tension instead of feeding it, you're creating distance between who you are and who you used to be. And in that distance, a new identity begins to form, not based on instant gratification, but built on discipline, not driven by need, but guided by choice. This is not about deprivation. It's about elevation. It's about saying, I deserve better than what numbs me. I deserve what awakens me. You are not here to be ruled by urges. You are here to learn from them, rise above them, and lead yourself through them. That's what makes you powerful. Not perfection, not pretending you don't feel the pull, but standing in that pull and still choosing truth, still choosing clarity, still choosing yourself. And that choice doesn't have to be loud. It doesn't have to be visible to anyone else. It only has to be real. Because the changes that matter most are the ones made in silence, in private, when no one's watching and you still choose to rise. That's where real transformation begins. Not in the spotlight, but in the shadows. Not in the noise, but in the pause. Not in the comfort, but in the courage to sit with yourself long enough to remember your worth. You are not the craving. You are not the habit. You are not the noise. You are the stillness beneath it all. The one who chooses. The one who listens. The one who leads. The real war is not outside you, it's inside. Every time you choose abstinence, you're stepping onto a battlefield where the fight is between who you've been and who you're becoming. That war isn't loud. It doesn't come with warning signs or applause. It's silent, quiet, hidden in the seconds where you decide whether to fall back into old patterns or stand up and claim your future. And in those moments, every small victory matters. Because what you choose in private is what shapes who you become in public. Abstinence demands that you stop lying to yourself. It strips away the justifications, the distractions, the excuses. It confronts you with your truth, and that truth might not be pretty at first. It might expose your fears, your insecurities, the things you've buried deep and hoped would stay forgotten. But facing that truth is the beginning of healing. Because you cannot change what you refuse to see. And you cannot grow while hiding from your own reflection. There is no shortcut to freedom. It is earned through discipline. Not the kind of discipline that punishes you, but the kind that protects you. The kind that says, I love myself enough to walk away from what damages me. That kind of strength doesn't come from force. It comes from self-respect. And self-respect grows every time you choose to act with integrity, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Abstinence is not about perfection. It's about presence. It's about being awake enough to recognize when you're being pulled by patterns that once owned you. And it's about being courageous enough to stop, to interrupt the cycle, to breathe instead of react, to listen instead of escape. You do that once and you plant a seed. You do it again and you water it. Over time, that seed becomes unshakable self-trust. You begin to realize that your worth was never in what you consumed or avoided or controlled. Your worth has always been in your awareness, in your willingness to stay present even when it's uncomfortable. Because real peace isn't found in the absence of struggle. It's found in your ability to remain steady through it. And abstinence is the training ground for that steadiness. The more you practice it, the more you reclaim. Not just time or energy, but identity. You start remembering who you were before the habits took over, before the noise clouded your mind. You remember that you were never weak, you were just disconnected. And every conscious choice brings you closer to connection, closer to clarity, closer to the version of yourself that doesn't just survive but leads, with strength, with grace, with conviction. This is what abstinence offers, not limitation but liberation, not emptiness but expansion, not silence but depth. And when you commit to it not just once but daily, you stop waiting for change and become the change. You stop reacting and begin creating. You stop living at the mercy of craving and start living in the truth of who you are. The more you reclaim your power through abstinence, the more you begin to feel the difference between survival and sovereignty. Survival is reactive. It's built on fear, urgency, and the need to avoid discomfort. Sovereignty is different. It's rooted in awareness. It's built on discipline, clarity, and choice. Abstinence is the doorway between those two lives. And every time you choose it, even in the smallest way, you're reminding yourself that you are no longer here to be consumed by impulses. You are here to master them. You start to recognize the patterns for what they really are. Not identities, not truths, but simply echoes of past conditioning. You realize the cravings are not your voice. They are noise. You are not what you crave. You are what you choose. And when you choose to pause instead of react, to reflect instead of repeat, something profound begins to shift. You start building a mind that no longer needs to chase relief because it's learning how to hold stillness. You build emotional stamina. You build a spine made of resolve. True strength isn't the ability to suppress emotion. It's the ability to feel fully without needing to escape. That's what abstinence teaches you, to feel everything, even the things that used to scare you. And in that feeling, you begin to understand that pain is not your punishment. It is your passage. It's the gateway to the deeper parts of yourself, the parts you couldn't access when you were constantly numbing or running. When you stop silencing the soul, it begins to rise. You begin to trust yourself again, not because you're perfect, but because you're present. Not because you never fall, but because you keep standing. That's where real confidence is born. Not from achievements, not from praise, but from consistency. From showing up for yourself over and over again. Even when it's hard, even when no one sees it. Especially then. Because that's when the foundation is built. The quiet hours, the private wins, the silent strength. And the world around you begins to feel different. Not because it's changed, but because you have. You're no longer reacting from lack. You're responding from fullness. Abstinence shows you that you already have what you were seeking in all the wrong places. Peace, direction, control, meaning. Not handed to you, but uncovered by you. It was always there. It just needed your silence to rise, your stillness to speak, your courage to make space for it. This is how transformation becomes permanent, not through massive events, but through daily decisions, through the slow burn of discipline, through the quiet fire of purpose, through the unshakable decision that your life will be defined by presence, not escape, that your soul will speak louder than your urges, and that no craving will ever be stronger than your commitment to live awake, aware, and absolutely unshakable in who you are becoming. The longer you stay committed to abstinence, the more clearly you begin to see what truly holds value. You no longer confuse stimulation for fulfillment. You stop mistaking momentary satisfaction for lasting peace. Abstinence pulls back the curtain and exposes what was never real to begin with. The illusions built by urgency, by noise, by habits that promised comfort but only delayed healing. And in that raw exposure, something powerful begins to form. The capacity to feel whole without needing anything outside of yourself to make it so. This is where power is born, not from control but from clarity. Not from suppressing desire but from understanding it. When you pause long enough to question what drives you, you begin to see the difference between craving and calling. One pulls you into cycles, the other pulls you toward purpose. And purpose doesn't beg for your attention. It waits in silence, patiently, until you're quiet enough to hear it. Abstinence creates that silence. Not the absence of thought, but the presence of space. Mental space, emotional space, spiritual space. That space becomes sacred. It becomes the ground where your self-awareness grows. You start to catch the triggers before they turn into behaviors. You begin to choose response over reaction. And that awareness multiplies. It bleeds into other parts of your life. You begin to eat differently, speak differently, even walk differently. Not because you're pretending to be someone else, but because you're remembering who you were before the noise shaped you. You return to your natural state of clarity, intention, and quiet strength. Abstinence sharpens your edge. It makes you conscious of every decision. You no longer move through life sleepwalking. You no longer live in cycles of regret. You learn to delay the temporary for the sake of the eternal. You learn that peace is not a prize you chase. It's a posture you choose. And when you make that choice over and over again, it becomes who you are. It becomes how you live. With presence, with depth, with a kind of inner stillness that nothing on the outside can shake. The voice of your soul, once drowned out by distraction, now speaks with clarity. It doesn't scream, it doesn't demand. It simply reminds you, this is who you are, this is who you've always been, underneath the craving, underneath the noise, underneath the masks. And once you begin to hear that voice, you'll never unhear it. You'll never again settle for shallow highs. You'll never again sacrifice long-term meaning for short-term relief. This is the reward of abstinence. Not just self-control, but self-connection. Not just discipline, but dignity. You stop running from your feelings and start facing them with open hands and open heart. You stop avoiding your life and start living it from the inside out. And in that inner stillness, you finally understand this silence you once feared is not empty. It is full. Full of truth, full of direction, full of everything you were meant to be. The more you honor that inner silence, the more grounded you become. You stop reacting to life like a leaf caught in the wind. You begin to move with intention, rooted in your values, anchored in your truth. Abstinence rewires you. It retrains your mind to pause instead of panic, to reflect instead of retreat. It teaches you that discomfort is not a sign of failure, but a sign of growth. Because nothing meaningful is built in comfort. Growth always comes wrapped in resistance, and abstinence is where you learn how to welcome it. When you abstain, you're not just avoiding temptation. You're making a declaration to yourself. You're saying, I am no longer available for what dims me. That level of self-command rewrites the story you've been telling yourself. The one where you were always chasing, always compensating, always proving. You start to realize you have nothing to chase because what you've been looking for is already within you. Peace doesn't come from escaping pressure. It comes from learning how to breathe inside it. That breath becomes a tool, a way to reset, a way to listen, a way to remember that your value is not up for negotiation. It was never tied to what you could consume, accomplish, or perform. It has always been defined by your willingness to align with truth, even when it costs you comfort. Abstinence holds you to that standard. It won't let you settle. It won't let you numb. It demands that you rise, not through force, but through presence. And presence is powerful. Because when you are truly present, you become untouchable by the things that once controlled you. You begin to choose from power, not from panic. You begin to act from clarity, not from craving. You move through the world with a quiet confidence, not because everything is perfect, but because you've learned to be steady in the storm. Abstinence doesn't eliminate storms. It just reminds you that you're the one who commands the wind. It's not about depriving yourself. It's about devoting yourself to healing, to alignment, to the version of you who's not owned by compulsion but guided by clarity. You've tasted the noise and now you choose the stillness. You've lived in reaction and now you rise in response. That shift, though subtle, changes everything. Because now you're not chasing freedom, you're becoming it. Your standards elevate. Your energy cleanses. Your focus sharpens. The more you choose abstinence, the more you build a life that doesn't need escape. A life that doesn't beg for permission to feel good. A life that feels good because it's built on discipline, honesty, and deep, unwavering self-respect. That's the gift you give yourself every time you say no to what weakens you and yes to what strengthens you. You're not losing anything. You're reclaiming everything. And in that reclaiming, you become unshakable. The moment you begin to reclaim your choices, you start to redefine your identity. You're no longer a prisoner of urges that used to dictate your every move. You're no longer stuck in loops that once felt like fate. Now, you're choosing deliberately. You're stepping back from automatic behaviors and stepping into conscious living. This isn't about control for the sake of pride. This is about alignment for the sake of peace. Because when your actions match your values, your heart finally stops fighting with itself. That's where real peace lives. Abstinence teaches you how to walk with integrity even when no one is watching. It strips away the noise and invites you to listen to the quiet parts of yourself, the ones you buried beneath the chaos of wanting. You start to notice how often you were using distractions to avoid the real work, how often you reached for comfort instead of courage. But now you're choosing to stand in the discomfort long enough to hear what it's trying to teach you. That's the transformation. That's where strength is forged, not by resisting life, but by entering it fully, awake and willing. This kind of discipline builds a deep self-trust, because every time you keep a promise to yourself, even a small one, you rebuild the bond that was broken when you gave yourself away for temporary relief. You begin to believe in your own word again. You stop needing external validation because your actions become the proof of your worth. You don't need to chase someone's approval when you've already earned your own respect. It's not always easy. There are days when the pull to escape will feel louder than the reason to stay grounded. But that's exactly where the shift happens. That space between the urge and the response, that's where freedom lives. You start to pause and ask, is this choice aligned with who I want to become? And in that pause, you remember your power. Because it's not about being perfect, it's about staying conscious, about choosing alignment over impulse, about making one right decision at a time until your entire life is shaped by strength. The discipline you're building isn't cold or rigid. It's not about punishment. It's about love, real love, the kind that says, I care about you too much to let you settle. You begin to mother yourself, father yourself, guide yourself. You become the guardian of your own potential. And that level of care transforms everything. You stop waiting for someone else to come save you because you've realized you are your own rescue. Abstinence isn't about loss. It's about leadership. You lead yourself away from what drains you. You lead yourself toward what builds you. And in doing so, you become the kind of person who doesn't just survive, but someone who rises, steady, clear, and unstoppable. You rise not because everything gets easier, but because you stop running from the hard things. You stop outsourcing your strength. You stop relying on external highs to lift an internal weight. Abstinence becomes the quiet rebellion against everything that ever told you that you had to be less to be loved. Every time you say no to what dims your spirit, you say yes to a life of deeper power. You start living by design, not by default. You stop living on repeat and start living on purpose. It takes courage to walk away from what once gave you comfort, even if it came at the cost of your peace. It takes vision to delay a quick reward for a deeper healing. You begin to notice how much of your life was shaped by needing the next distraction, the next escape, the next hit of pleasure to numb the ache of disconnection. But you're not choosing that anymore. You're not trying to patch holes with pleasure. You're building a new foundation, one that doesn't need to be propped up, one that stands on its own, unshaken. That's what true strength looks like. It's quiet. It's consistent. It shows up when no one else does. It chooses integrity when compromise would be easier. It listens inward instead of following the crowd. It doesn't demand attention. It commands respect because it's real. And real strength never has to scream. It simply moves with clarity. When you abstain, you walk in that strength. You stop proving. You start becoming. Abstinence is a mirror. It reflects what's been buried, hidden beneath habits and impulses. And at first, what you see might scare you. But that fear is just the ego trembling because it knows it's losing control. It knows your soul is waking up. And the soul doesn't live in the shallow. The soul asks you to dive deeper, to heal what hurts, to face what you've avoided, and to trust that there's something greater waiting for you on the other side of discomfort. That's why it matters. Not because it makes you perfect, but because it makes you real. because it teaches you how to sit with longing and not panic, how to feel lonely and not settle, how to hold your ground when everything in you wants to run. That's power. That's how you stop being controlled by circumstances and start being guided by your convictions. When your soul speaks, it doesn't shout. It whispers. It waits for you to get quiet enough to hear it. Abstinence creates that quiet. And in the stillness, you'll hear the truth that nothing outside, you can fill the space you were born to fill yourself. You don't need more. You need less noise, less chaos, less compromise. Because once you stop giving your energy to what drains you, it becomes clear what you're really meant for. And that clarity, undeniable, unshakable, is where everything begins to change. Clarity brings choices, and choices shape destinies. The moment you see clearly, you can no longer unsee what you've outgrown. The things that once pulled you in no longer hold the same power. They lose their shine, they lose their grip, because you've changed. And when you change, the world you once tolerated starts to feel too small. You begin to notice how often you've settled for less than what you were made for. Not because you were weak, but because you were unconscious. Abstinence wakes you up. It brings your attention back to what actually matters. You stop asking, what do I feel like doing? And start asking, what will move me closer to who I'm becoming? That question cuts through the noise. It breaks addictions. It dismantles excuses. It lifts you out of the patterns that kept you stuck. And suddenly, even though the path is narrow, you feel stronger walking it. You no longer need a crowd to confirm your direction. Your own growth becomes confirmation enough. Your own peace becomes the proof that you're walking in alignment. When you abstain from what numbs you, what used to feel impossible starts to feel inevitable. Not because it got easier, but because you got clearer. The space you once filled with distractions becomes a sacred space for growth. Instead of feeding cravings, you start feeding your character. Instead of chasing validation, you build values. You no longer trade long-term fulfillment for momentary escape. You learn to sit with tension, and in doing so, you unlock strength you never knew you had. That's where identity is rewritten. In the fire of restraint, in the silence of discipline, in the stillness where the soul is heard louder than the body. Every time you say no to what costs you your peace, you say yes to your power. Every time you sit with a craving and don't cave, you prove to yourself that you are not your impulse. You are your intention. You are your commitment. You are your evolution in progress. There is a deep, quiet pride that comes from staying true when no one's watching. It builds a type of dignity that can't be faked, can't be bought, can't be broken, because it's built brick by brick in the dark, when no one sees you. When no one claps for you, when the only applause is the sound of your own heartbeat steadying as you hold the line. That is where greatness is born, not in the spotlight, but in the sacred silence of self-respect. Abstinence teaches you that wholeness is not found in the next indulgence. It's already inside you, waiting to be remembered. You're not becoming someone new. You're returning to who you were before the noise, before the wounds, before the masks. And the more you let go of what you don't need, the more space you make for the life you were always meant to live. Fully awake, fully present,